Top 13 American TV hosts who defended BTS like their careers depended on it in 2026. What do you think was 2026 the year American television finally stopped underestimating BTS? Or the year BTS proved they never needed validation in the first place? Picture this. Flashing studio lights, live audiences holding their breath, viral Twitter storms exploding in real time, and in the middle of it all, primetime American TV hosts stepping forward, not to play it safe, but to defend 7 Korean artists with conviction that shocked even their own viewers. Why would established media figures risk backlash, ratings drops, or industry side-eyes just to stand up for a K-pop group? Was it strategy? Was it sincerity? Or was it something deeper, respect earned over a decade of consistency, artistry, and undeniable cultural impact? In 2026, the narrative around BTS wasn't just about music charts anymore. It was about representation, industry bias, military hiatus comebacks, global influence, and the uncomfortable truth that Western media had once underestimated them. And when criticism resurfaced about language, about relevance, about are they still big, something unexpected happened. 13 American TV hosts didn't stay neutral. They went all in. Some shut down guests mid-interview. Some delivered monologues that felt personal. Some pulled out data, receipts, and career timelines live on air. The energy? Intense. The reactions? Viral. The impact? Bigger than anyone predicted. So here's the real question. Who were the loudest voices in the room when it mattered most? Who defended BTS, not as a trend, but as legends in real time? And what exactly did they say that made the internet lose its mind? Stay with me, because this list is not just about names, it's about moments that reshaped pop culture conversations in 2026. Number 13. The late-night reality check, Jimmy Kimmel. In early 2026, when the post-military comeback conversation around BTS started getting weirdly dismissive on certain corners of American media, subtle jabs about, are they still relevant? And lazy comments about language barriers, Jimmy Kimmel did something nobody expected. He didn't joke first, he corrected first. And that shift? It hit differently. On a February episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live, during what was supposed to be a light monologue about global pop trends, Kimmel paused mid-bit and said, almost casually but with a sharp edge, "You know, it's funny how people still act surprised that BTS is massive. They've been massive for almost a decade." The audience laughed, but he didn't. He continued, pulling up actual stats on the screen behind him, sold-out stadiums across 3 continents in under 2 hours, record-breaking streaming numbers within 24 hours of their reunion single, and a humanitarian campaign that raised millions within days. That wasn't fluff, that was receipts. And when a guest comedian later tried to reduce BTS to that K-pop thing teenage girls scream about, Kimmel leaned back in his chair and shut it down smoothly. Yeah, and those teenage girls just outsold half the industry you're in. The crowd erupted. The clip went viral within hours. ARMY trended his name worldwide. But what made this moment different wasn't just the clapback, it was the context. Kimmel had hosted BTS multiple times before their hiatus. He'd seen the scale firsthand, the lines wrapping around blocks, the security protocols that rivaled political events, the controlled chaos that only happens when global icons step into a studio. He wasn't speaking from hype, he was speaking from experience. And in 2026, when Western media narratives tried to subtly test whether BTS's absence had cooled their dominance, Kimmel reframed the entire conversation. He reminded viewers that military service wasn't a scandal, it was a civic duty. He explained in simple terms why South Korean enlistment timelines shouldn't be weaponized as industry weakness. He even referenced how RM, Jin, SUGA, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook each pursued solo projects that topped global charts during hiatus, proving that the brand wasn't fragile, it was layered. That level of detail wasn't accidental. His research team clearly came prepared. But here's the deeper layer. Kimmel understood the power of normalization. Instead of treating BTS as a novelty act returning from pause, he treated them as established legends resuming their throne. And that framing matters on American television, especially in a landscape where non-English artists still fight for equal footing. He compared their reunion momentum to classic American rock bands coming back from breaks. He said, "Nobody asks if U2 is still relevant every time they tour again. That line alone sparked think pieces. Industry insiders quietly acknowledged that he was right. The numbers backed him up. Billboard data, touring revenue projections, brand partnerships all pointed to sustained dominance. But beyond stats, there was something emotional in his tone. It felt protective, like someone who had watched the journey unfold in real time and was tired of the selective amnesia. When social media tried to twist his defense into Kimmel pandering to fans, he doubled down the following week, inviting a music analyst to break down BTS's economic impact on U.S. touring markets, hotels, local vendors, venue employment spikes. It became less about fandom and more about factual influence. That's when the narrative shifted from TV host defends boy band to mainstream media acknowledges global cultural power. And let's be real, Jimmy Kimmel didn't need to take that stance. Late-night hosts survive by staying neutral or playing safe. But in 2026, he chose clarity over convenience. He didn't shout, he didn't dramatize. He simply presented the truth in prime time, calm, direct, slightly amused at the outdated criticism. And that calm confidence? It hit harder than any viral rant could. So ask yourself this: when a mainstream American host corrects misinformation live on air without turning it into a spectacle, isn't that a different kind of defense? The kind that doesn't beg for applause but earns it? And if number 13 already came in this composed and calculated, what happens when we climb higher on this list? Number 12, the daytime firestorm, Whoopi Goldberg. When the debate about BTS's place in Western music culture flared up again in mid-2026, sparked by a controversial op-ed questioning whether their post-military comeback hype manufactured nostalgia, Whoopi Goldberg didn't just respond. She dismantled the entire premise on live daytime television. And if you know Whoopi, you know she doesn't waste words unless she means every single one. On The View, during a heated Hot Topics segment, one co-host cautiously brought up the article suggesting that BTS's dominance was driven more by organized fandom than artistic depth. The table shifted. The audience murmured. And then Whoopi leaned forward, glasses low on her nose, that unmistakable tone in her voice, the one that signals she's about to drop something serious. So, let me get this straight, she said. When rock bands sell out stadiums, that's passion. When hip-hop artists mobilize communities, that's culture. But when 7 Korean men do it globally, suddenly it's manufactured? The silence that followed was thick. And then applause real, rolling applause. But Whoopi didn't stop there. She contextualized it. She reminded viewers that dismissing BTS wasn't just about music, it was about long-standing biases in American entertainment toward non-English acts. She referenced how Latin artists once faced similar gatekeeping. She talked about how Motown was once called a trend, and then she dropped a line that spread like wildfire across social media. If you don't understand the language, that doesn't mean it doesn't understand you. That sentence alone turned into think pieces, TikTok edits, Instagram, quote, cards. But what made her defense powerful wasn't just emotion, it was history. Whoopi has decades in the industry. She's seen cycles of hype, dismissal, comeback, reinvention. And she made it clear that BTS's trajectory didn't follow a fad pattern. She cited their songwriting credits, their involvement in production, their philanthropy campaigns with UNICEF, and their documented speeches at the United Nations. You don't fake 10 years of impact, she said flatly. And here's where it got even deeper. Instead of framing BTS as untouchable idols, she framed them as artists who endured scrutiny that American acts rarely face. She pointed out how every comeback was dissected not just musically, but politically and culturally. We critique them like ambassadors, not entertainers, she added. That observation hit hard because it was true. BTS has always carried the weight of representation on their shoulders, something Whoopi clearly recognized. The conversation turned toward their military service, and again, she shut down the narrative that it interrupted momentum. It's called responsibility, she said. And if anything, it proves they're bigger than the charts. That moment reframed the hiatus not as a setback, but as proof of grounded identity. Viewers who may not even have been ARMY suddenly saw the situation differently. The defense wasn't fangirl energy. It was grounded, cultural analysis from someone who understands systemic dismissal. And when another panelist cautiously suggested that maybe BTS's appeal was age-specific, Whoopi laughed. Have you seen their concert demographics? It's not just teenagers. It's teachers, nurses, dads, veterans. She emphasized the emotional storytelling in their lyrics, mental health, self-love, societal pressure. Themes universal enough that translation becomes secondary. Behind the scenes, industry insiders later revealed that the segment generated one of the highest engagement spikes for The View that quarter, not because it was scandalous, but because it felt honest. Whoopi wasn't defending a trend. She was defending fairness. And that distinction matters. In a media landscape where narratives can be shaped by subtle bias, her voice cut through like a blade. Calm, experienced, unshaken. She didn't yell. She didn't dramatize. She simply refused to let misinformation breathe comfortably on her watch, and that's what made it powerful. Because sometimes, the strongest defense isn't loud, it's authoritative. So here's something to think about. When a veteran of Hollywood with nothing to prove chooses to speak up for 7 global artists from across the world, what does that say about their impact? And if number 12 already shook daytime television with this level of conviction, what kind of intensity are we about to see as we move closer to the top? Number 11. The cultural breakdown, Trevor Noah. When the global media cycle in 2026 started recycling the tired question, is BTS still relevant after their military hiatus? Trevor Noah didn't just roll his eyes. He turned the entire conversation into a masterclass in cultural perspective. And if you've ever watched him dissect politics, race, or global power dynamics, you know he doesn't argue emotionally, he argues intelligently, with humor that slices through ignorance without sounding bitter. During a primetime segment on his weekly commentary special, Trevor opened with what seemed like a casual joke. It's fascinating how America decides when the rest of the world is relevant. The audience laughed. But then he pivoted. Smooth. Calculated. BTS goes away to serve their country, comes back, breaks streaming records again, and somehow people here ask if they've fallen off. Fallen off where? Earth? That line trended within minutes, but Trevor didn't stop at punchlines. He pulled up global touring revenue numbers on screen, showing that BTS's 2026 reunion concerts sold out faster than many legacy American acts. He compared their comeback to major Western artists who take 5-year breaks and are welcomed back as icons. When American artists take a hiatus, it's called mystique. When Korean artists do it, it's called decline. Why? That why lingered. And you could feel the room shift from laughter to realization. Trevor has always been sharp about media bias, and this moment felt consistent with his broader philosophy. He explained how the Western entertainment industry often operates on a subconscious hierarchy. English first, everyone else second. He pointed out how streaming changed power structures, how fan-driven economies disrupt traditional gatekeeping, and how BTS mastered both without sacrificing identity. He even referenced specific members, RM's leadership and intellectual interviews, SUGA's production credits across genres, J-Hope's festival-breaking solo performance history, Jimin's chart-topping solo milestones, V's crossover appeal in fashion and acting, Jungkook's global pop positioning, and Jin's viral return moment that symbolized reunion energy. That level of detail wasn't surface-level commentary. It showed research. It showed respect. And when a panel guest suggested that BTS's success was algorithm-driven, Trevor shut it down instantly. Algorithms don't buy stadium tickets. Humans do. The audience clapped hard. But what made his defense resonate wasn't just statistics, it was lived experience. Trevor, as someone who built a career navigating multiple cultures, understood what it meant to be globally massive yet still questioned in America. He shared a personal anecdote about performing stand-up in countries where he wasn't the cultural majority. Just because it's not centered here doesn't mean it's not centered somewhere, he said. That statement reframed the entire relevance debate. He then flipped the lens back on the critics. Maybe the question isn't whether BTS is still relevant. Maybe the question is why some media outlets are uncomfortable with them never needing Western validation to begin with. That line? Explosive. Social media lit up. Clips circulated across platforms. Even non-fans began engaging with the discussion because it transcended fandom. It was about power dynamics in global pop culture. And Trevor's tone wasn't defensive in a chaotic way. It was calm, analytical, slightly amused at the absurdity of the narrative. He wasn't shouting for army approval, he was exposing flawed logic. He highlighted how BTS consistently contributed to songwriting and production, debunking the manufactured pop group stereotype that still lingers in certain Western circles. He emphasized their philanthropic work, their mental health advocacy, their cultural diplomacy. "You don't accidentally influence the UN," he said dryly. That quiet sarcasm carried weight. Industry commentators later noted how Trevor's segment reframed the comeback narrative in mainstream discourse. Instead of asking if BTS had faded, media conversations began focusing on how rare it is for any act, Western or not, to sustain a decade of dominance. And that's the difference Trevor made. He didn't just defend BTS emotionally, he defended them structurally. He attacked the flawed framework of the criticism itself, and when you dismantle the framework, the argument collapses on its own. So here's a thought. If relevance is measured by global impact, sustained artistry, and cultural influence beyond language barriers, then who exactly gets to define it? And if number 11 already turned a boy band debate into a global media critique, how intense are the next defenses going to be as we climb higher? Number 10. The ratings risk, Ellen DeGeneres. When Ellen DeGeneres stepped back into the daytime spotlight in 2026 for a limited-run comeback series, nobody expected BTS to become one of her boldest talking points. But the moment criticism started circulating online, claiming that BTS's reunion success was fan-driven hype masking fading mainstream appeal, Ellen did something unexpected. She didn't dance around it. She addressed it head-on. And coming from someone who had hosted BTS during some of their most explosive early US appearances, her words carried historical weight. On her revived talk format, Ellen opened a segment by smiling at the camera and saying, "You know who doesn't need me defending them? BTS. But I'm going to anyway." The audience laughed, but her tone quickly shifted. She rolled footage from their previous appearances on her show, flashbacks of screaming crowds, record-breaking YouTube clips, backstage chaos that only global superstars generate. Then she paused the screen and asked, "Does this look like a phase to you?" That rhetorical question lingered. Ellen reminded viewers that she witnessed firsthand how BTS changed the daytime TV atmosphere. Security teams had to double their standard protocol. International press flooded studio lots. Social media engagement skyrocketed every time the group appeared. "We didn't adjust to them," she said. "The industry adjusted because of them." That line alone reframed the narrative. But the real turning point came when a guest entertainment columnist suggested that BTS's 2026 dominance was nostalgia-driven. Ellen leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Nostalgia doesn't break new streaming records," she replied. She cited their comeback singles' 2-4-hour global numbers, their multi-city stadium sellouts, and the demographic breakdown that showed a growing adult audience, not just longtime teen fans. "That's expansion, not nostalgia," she clarified. What made Ellen's defense compelling wasn't just statistics, it was perspective. She spoke about watching RM lead interviews with calm intelligence, about SUGA, discussing production techniques in green rooms, about J-Hope's work ethic during rehearsals, about Jimin's meticulous attention to choreography, about V's quiet but magnetic camera presence, about Jungkook's vocal discipline, and about Jin's humor easing staff tension during high-pressure live tapings. "They weren't just talented," she said. "They were intentional." That word intentional shifted the conversation from hype to craftsmanship. Ellen also addressed a deeper issue, Western gatekeeping. She acknowledged that early in BTS's US rise, some executives privately questioned whether an all-Korean group could sustain mainstream attention. "I heard those doubts," she admitted. "And every single time, they proved them wrong." That admission felt raw, honest. It wasn't a viral rant, it was reflective, and viewers responded to that vulnerability. Social platforms lit up with clips of her calmly dismantling the manufactured pop stereotype. She explained how involved the members were in songwriting and production, how their Love Yourself era reshaped conversations around mental health among young viewers, and how their philanthropy extended beyond branding into measurable action. "You can't fake a decade of consistency," she emphasized. But here's what made this a ratings risk. Daytime television thrives on broad neutrality. Taking a strong stance, especially defending a global act against subtle American media skepticism, can polarize audiences. Ellen knew that. Yet she chose clarity over comfort. She even invited a music industry analyst to break down touring economics, showing how BTS's concerts boosted local economies in US. Cities' hotel bookings, restaurant traffic, temporary employment spikes. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't about fandom hysteria, it was about tangible impact. And when critics online accused her of pandering, she responded the following week with a simple line. Supporting artists who work hard isn't pandering. It's fairness. Calm, direct, no theatrics. The segment became one of the most replayed clips of her comeback season, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like someone correcting the record from a place of lived experience. Ellen wasn't discovering BTS in 2026. She had watched their trajectory unfold in real time. She had seen the skepticism, the breakthroughs, the global expansion. And in that moment, she made it clear that questioning their relevance said more about the critic than the group. So here's something to think about. When a veteran TV host who once introduced BTS to millions of American households chooses to defend their legacy instead of playing neutral, doesn't that signal something bigger than fandom? And if number 10 already challenged industry memory on live television, how much stronger do you think the voices above are going to be? Number 9. The primetime pivot. Stephen Colbert. When Stephen Colbert decides to take something seriously, you can feel it. The satire softens, the eyebrows lower, and suddenly the laughter in the room turns into focused silence. That's exactly what happened in 2026, when the post-hiatus discourse around BTS started leaning into that old, tired narrative again. Were they bigger before? Was the break too long? Did the Western audience move on? And instead of turning it into a throwaway joke, Colbert turned it into a prime-time pivot moment. On The Late Show, during what began as a light segment about global music trends, Colbert pulled up a mock relevance meter graphic on the screen. The audience laughed at first until he pointed to BTS sitting at the very top. Now, some critics say they've lost momentum, he said, adjusting his glasses dramatically. So I did what any responsible host would do. I checked reality. The crowd clapped. Then the numbers came in. Stadium capacities, global streaming rebounds, merchandise revenue spikes, international media coverage density. Colbert delivered it with his signature dry humor, but beneath it was a clear message. The facts didn't match the skepticism. And then came the line that set social media on fire. If this is decline, most artists would sell their Grammys for it. The applause was instant, loud, sustained. But Colbert didn't stop at numbers. He contextualized BTS within American history. He compared their cultural wave to the Beatles' British invasion, how initial media skepticism turned into undeniable legacy. Back then, people asked if 4 guys from Liverpool could last, he said. Now we study them in music history. That comparison wasn't casual. It elevated the conversation from pop trend to cultural shift. And when a political commentator guest tried to downplay BTS's influence by labeling them internet famous, Colbert tilted his head and replied, "You mean famous where people actually live now?" That sharp, modern observation reframed the entire debate. In 2026, digital presence isn't secondary, it's central. Colbert highlighted how BTS mastered both physical touring and digital engagement, long before many Western acts adapted. He referenced RM's thoughtful interviews about art and philosophy, SUGA's cross-genre production credits, J-Hope's boundary-breaking festival appearances, Jimin's global chart milestones, V's cultural crossover into fashion and acting, Jungkook's mainstream pop dominance, and Jin's symbolic return moment that reignited reunion energy. He didn't list them randomly. He wove them into a narrative of sustained evolution. They didn't pause, he explained. They diversified. That word diversified shifted the lens. Military service wasn't stagnation. It was a structured chapter in a larger arc. And Colbert, known for dissecting political narratives, approached the BTS debate the same way he would approach policy spin. He questioned who benefits from declaring global artists over prematurely. He explored how Western media sometimes struggles with power that doesn't originate domestically, and he did it without sounding preachy. It was clever, layered, controlled. The studio audience could sense it. This wasn't just entertainment filler, it was commentary. When critics online accused him of exaggerating, Colbert responded the next night with a grin. "I only exaggerate when I'm joking." Then he replayed the data. Calm, reassured, almost amused by the resistance. The segment became one of the most shared late-show clips of the year, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like intellectual validation. Colbert wasn't defending BTS as a fan. He was defending consistency, data, and cultural literacy. He even touched on their philanthropic influence, noting how their campaigns mobilized global audiences beyond music consumption. "That's not fandom," he said. "That's infrastructure." And that's what made number 9 powerful. He reframed BTS from pop act to cultural institution on American primetime television. No shouting, no theatrics, just smart, layered dismantling of shallow criticism. So let me ask you this. When a host known for political sharpness applies that same analytical lens to defend 7 artists from across the world, doesn't that say their impact has moved beyond entertainment? And if number 9 already turned late-night satire into cultural validation, what kind of intensity is waiting as we move higher on this list?
Number 8. The Unfiltered Stand. Kelly Clarkson. When Kelly Clarkson speaks about artists, she doesn't do it as a distant commentator. She does it as a singer who survived the industry, who understands chart pressure, vocal strain, label politics, and the emotional cost of staying relevant. So, when in 2026, a wave of commentary started suggesting that BTS's reunion momentum was fan-fueled loyalty rather than musical growth, Kelly didn't just disagree, she took it personally. And you could hear it in her voice. On The Kelly Clarkson Show, during a music roundtable segment, a guest analyst casually said, "Well, sometimes global acts rely on fandom power more than evolving sound." The room shifted. Kelly blinked slowly, then leaned forward. "Have you actually listened to their solo work during hiatus?" she asked. Calm, direct, no smile. That tone, it meant she was about to educate. She began breaking it down like only a musician could. She talked about vocal layering techniques in Jungkook's solo tracks, about Jimin's tonal control and falsetto agility, about V's baritone texture that's rare in mainstream pop, V's probliden, versost and tonal C-verse, falsetto and texture that's rare in mainstream pop, vocal layering texture that's rare in mainstream pop. Now tonal Jungkook's solo tracks, now not probliden, about Jin's emotional resonance post-service, about RM's lyricism that blends introspection with cultural commentary, about SUGA's production structure and minimalistic hip-hop influence, and about J-Hope's rhythmic versatility that crosses genres seamlessly. "That's not stagnation," she said firmly. "That's expansion." The audience clapped, but she kept going. Kelly explained how difficult it is for a group to maintain identity while allowing individual artistry to flourish. She compared it to bands she'd toured with how solo evolution often strengthens group chemistry rather than weakens it. "If anything," she added, "coming back after growth like that makes you more dangerous." That word dangerous lit up social media. Clips of her defense circulated everywhere. But what made it hit harder was her credibility. Kelly is a Grammy-winning vocalist. When she talks about breath control, live stamina, or studio production authenticity, industry insiders listen. She even referenced BTS's live performance consistency, noting how rare it is to combine heavy choreography with stable vocals at stadium scale. "You don't fake that," she said. Then she addressed the language barrier argument head-on. "Music isn't a spelling bee," she stated. "If emotion translates, the song works." The crowd roared. It wasn't rehearsed. It felt instinctive. She shared how she'd watched audiences non-Korean speakers sing along phonetically at concerts. "That's connection," she emphasized, "not hype." And here's where it turned reflective. Kelly admitted that early in her career, she'd faced assumptions about being just a TV product because of her American Idol roots. "People love to reduce what they don't fully understand," she said softly. That vulnerability tied her experience to BTS's journey in Western media. She wasn't defending from a distance. She was defending from empathy. The next day, headlines framed her segment as one of the most candid defenses of BTS by an American musician host in 2026. Industry blogs analyzed her breakdown of their vocal technique. Fans praised her authenticity. Even neutral viewers commented that her argument felt grounded in craft rather than hype. And Kelly doubled down the following week by performing a short acoustic mashup of BTS-inspired melodies during her Kellyoke segment. Subtle, respectful, but unmistakable. She didn't need to, she chose to. That's what made number 8 powerful. It wasn't just cultural commentary, it was artistic validation from someone who understands the grind behind the glamour. So here's a question for you. When a powerhouse vocalist publicly acknowledges the technical and emotional depth of 7 global artists, does that shift the conversation from popularity to legitimacy? And if number 8 already defended BTS with musician-level precision, what kind of fire are we about to see as we climb higher? Number 7. The political mic drop, Jon Stewart. When Jon Stewart reclaims a desk, you know something serious is about to be dissected. He doesn't chase trends. He interrogates narratives. So, when the 2026 conversation around BTS started drifting into coded territory phrases like overexposed foreign act or global fatigue, Jon didn't treat it like pop gossip. He treated it like media analysis. And that shift? It changed the temperature instantly. On his weekly political satire show, Stewart opened with a montage of headlines subtly questioning BTS's staying power after their military hiatus. He paused the clip, leaned back and said, "Interesting how global only sounds threatening when it's not American." The audience went silent before erupting into applause. That wasn't a joke, it was a thesis statement. Jon unpacked how Western media historically reacts when cultural dominance shifts outward. He referenced past skepticism toward Latin waves, British invasions, even early hip-hop. Every time the center moves, he said, someone calls it a phase. Then he pulled up hard numbers. BTS 2026 reunion tour selling out faster than several long-established U.S. acts, streaming rebounds that outpaced industry projections, and cross-market brand partnerships expanding rather than shrinking. If this is decline, Stewart quipped dryly, Wall Street should start declining immediately. But what made his defense hit differently was the political framing. He connected BTS's mandatory military service to civic duty narratives Americans respect domestically. When American artists serve in the National Guard or speak about patriotism, we applaud, he noted. When Korean artists fulfill their country's law, we call it disruption. That double standard landed hard. He wasn't just defending 7 musicians. He was exposing selective empathy. Stewart then highlighted individual depth. RM's interviews about art and democracy, SUGA's commentary on mental health and creative pressure, Not Hope's disciplined performance evolution, Jimin's vulnerability and solo expression, V's artistic experimentation, Jungkook's crossover pop fluency, and Jin's symbolic return that recentered group unity. That's not manufactured, Jon said firmly. That's maturing. He dissected the manufactured band stereotype by explaining the group's songwriting and production credits, showing on-screen breakdowns of contribution percentages across albums. If this is factory work, he joked, it's the most overqualified factory in history. The crowd laughed, but the data stayed visible. Stewart thrives on evidence. And in 2026, evidence favored BTS. He also addressed the fandom narrative. We love when fans mobilize for comic book movies, he pointed out. We call it culture. When fans mobilize for Korean artists, we call it manipulation. That line triggered online debates for days. Analysts later noted that his segment reframed BTS not as outsiders breaking in, but as participants reshaping global pop economics. He even examined how streaming democratized charts, weakening traditional gatekeepers who once controlled exposure. Maybe the discomfort, he suggested calmly, is about losing monopoly on attention. That wasn't loud, it was surgical. Stewart's tone never turned chaotic. It was measured, almost academic. That's what made it powerful. He wasn't shouting praise. He was dismantling flawed arguments piece by piece. By the end of the segment, the narrative had shifted from, "Is BTS still big?" to "Why does Western media struggle to acknowledge global power shifts?" And that's a different battlefield entirely. Social media lit up, not just with army applause, but with media scholars and commentators dissecting his breakdown. Because when Jon Stewart defends something, he rarely does it emotionally, he does it structurally. And structure is harder to dismiss than hype. So let me ask you this. When a political satirist known for holding governments accountable applies that same analytical lens to defend 7 artists, doesn't that elevate the conversation beyond music charts? And if number 7 already turned pop discourse into a media accountability lesson, how explosive do you think the top 6 are about to be?
Number 6. The industry insider defense, Oprah Winfrey. When Oprah Winfrey speaks, the room doesn't just listen, it recalibrates. She doesn't chase viral moments, she creates perspective shifts. So when in 2026 the conversation around BTS subtly shifted from celebration to skepticism, whispers about peak already passed, and Western attention cooling, Oprah didn't respond with hype. She responded with authority. And that authority carried decades of media influence behind it. During a televised special focused on global cultural leaders shaping the modern era, Oprah included BTS in a segment discussing artistic longevity. The inclusion alone was powerful. But what truly shifted the energy was how she framed them. Legacy, she said slowly, isn't about noise. It's about impact sustained over time. She then rolled a timeline graphic: debut years, global breakthroughs, philanthropic milestones, UN appearances, Billboard chart arcs, military service chapter, solo expansions, reunion surge. It wasn't fan service editing, it was structured storytelling. Oprah emphasized how rare it is for any act, Western or not, to maintain a decade-long global presence without imploding internally. She spoke about leadership dynamics, pointing out RM's intellectual steadiness and diplomatic tone in international interviews. She highlighted SUGA's producer credibility in crossing genre barriers. She acknowledged J-Hope's performance discipline that elevated stage standards. She noted Jimin's emotional transparency in solo narratives. She described V's artistic curiosity that bridges music and fashion. She recognized Jungkook's global pop adaptability. And she called Jin's return from military service a moment that symbolized patience meeting perseverance. That phrasing alone trended worldwide. But Oprah didn't stop at admiration. She addressed the skepticism head-on. There's a pattern, she explained. When influence originates outside traditional Western power centers, we question its sustainability. The audience murmured in agreement. She referenced how similar doubts once followed African literature movements, Latin music expansions, even early streaming-era artists. Relevance, she continued, is often defined by those uncomfortable losing the spotlight. That wasn't an attack, it was analysis. And Oprah thrives in analysis rooted in experience. She has interviewed presidents, activists, industry titans. She understands power narratives. So when she reframed BTS not as a K-pop act trying to maintain US attention, but as global architects of their own ecosystem, it felt definitive. She highlighted the economic ripple effects of their tours in American cities: employment boosts, tourism spikes, cross-market brand integration. She cited mental health advocacy campaigns that resonated beyond music charts. You don't mobilize millions around self-worth messaging by accident, she said. And then came the line that silenced the room. If consistency were accidental, it wouldn't last 10 years. That sentence spread like wildfire. Analysts replayed the segment. Cultural commentators dissected her framing. Because Oprah didn't defend BTS emotionally, she validated them institutionally. She placed them in conversations about leadership, infrastructure, and global storytelling. And when critics online accused her of romanticizing pop culture, she calmly responded in a follow-up interview. Understanding influence isn't romantic. It's responsible. That response carried weight. Oprah doesn't engage in petty debate. She reframes. She elevates. And in doing so, she changed the 2026 discourse from, "Are BTS still relevant?" to, "How do we measure sustained global influence fairly?" That's a bigger question than charts. It's about power distribution in culture. So think about this. When one of the most influential media figures in American history positions 7 Korean artists within the framework of legacy rather than trend, doesn't that permanently shift perception? And if number 6 already brought institutional validation into the conversation, what kind of force are the top 5 about to unleash? Number 5. The no-nonsense breakdown. Anderson Cooper. When Anderson Cooper talks, it's rarely about pop culture fluff. He's known for war zones, political accountability, disaster coverage, investigative depth. So, when BTS became a topic on his 2026 special segment examining global influence in the digital age, nobody expected him to come in this firm, but he did, and he didn't blink. The conversation started cautiously. A panelist suggested that BTS's comeback momentum might be social media amplified perception rather than real-world dominance. Anderson didn't react emotionally. He adjusted his notes, looked straight into the camera, and said, "Let's separate perception from data." And just like that, the tone shifted from opinion to evidence. On-screen graphics appeared. Ticket sales verified by Stadium reports, streaming rebounds confirmed by global platforms, demographic growth beyond teen markets, cross-continental media licensing numbers. Anderson read them calmly, methodically. These figures, he stated, don't reflect decline, they reflect durability. That word durability landed differently coming from a journalist known for factual precision. But what elevated his defense wasn't just statistics, it was context. He reframed BTS's mandatory military service not as a disruption but as structural reality in South Korea. It's a legal obligation, he clarified. Framing it as a career stumble misunderstands the system entirely. That correction mattered. Western coverage often simplifies global systems through an American lens. Anderson dismantled that lens gently but firmly. He then addressed the manufactured group stereotype. Multiple members hold songwriting and production credits across albums and solo releases, he said, citing documented contributions. That challenges the assumption of creative passivity. No drama, just facts. But you could feel the impact. He went further examining the economic footprint of their U.S. tours, hotel occupancy spikes, temporary job increases, local vendor revenue boosts. Cities compete to host tours like this, he explained. That's measurable impact. At this point, the segment had moved far beyond fandom discourse. It was infrastructure analysis. And then came the human layer. Anderson acknowledged BTS's advocacy campaigns, mental health awareness, anti-violence initiatives, youth empowerment collaborations. Cultural influence isn't only entertainment, he noted. It's narrative shaping. That phrasing reframed them as participants in global conversation rather than temporary chart fixtures. A guest attempted to pivot back to the idea of peak past. Anderson paused and replied with a measured question. By whose metric? Silence followed. Because that's what Anderson does, he exposes weak frameworks by asking precise questions. He even referenced individual trajectories, RM's diplomatic interviews and intellectual engagement, SUGA's production crossovers, Hope's stage-scale discipline, Jimin's emotional resonance in solo work, V's artistic branding, Jungkook's global chart positioning, Jin's symbolic return marking unity. He wasn't fangirling, he was documenting. And documentation carries weight. Social media reactions weren't chaotic, they were analytical. Media scholars praised the segment for challenging Western-centric bias without theatrics. Industry commentators noted how rare it is for a hard news journalist to allocate serious airtime to pop influence unless it meets a threshold of measurable significance. And that was the point. Anderson wasn't defending BTS as celebrities, he was validating them as a global case study. The following week, he briefly revisited the topic after online pushback, reiterating calmly, facts remain facts, no escalation. No defensive energy, just quiet confidence in documented evidence. That's what made number 5 powerful. It wasn't loud, it wasn't viral for shock value, it was credible. And credibility in mainstream American news carries long-term influence. So here's something to consider. When a journalist known for conflict reporting and political scrutiny treats 7 artists as a legitimate subject of global impact analysis, how doesn't that elevate the conversation beyond pop fandom entirely? And if number 5 already brought investigative-level validation into the spotlight, how intense are the top 4 about to be? Number 4. The legal level shutdown, Sunny Hostin. When Sunny Hostin steps into a debate, she doesn't rely on vibes, she brings legal precision. A former federal prosecutor turned respected television host, Sunny doesn't argue loosely. She builds cases. So, when in late 2026, a media roundtable began subtly framing BTS's dominance as algorithm-inflated influence and questioning whether their global success reflected authentic mainstream integration, Sunny didn't react emotionally. She cross-examined the premise. And that's when everything shifted. On a live episode of The View, the conversation turned toward global pop power. A guest analyst suggested that BTS's comeback numbers might be digitally exaggerated compared to traditional US benchmarks. Sunny leaned forward, pen in hand, and asked calmly, "Exaggerated based on which reporting standard?" The guest hesitated. That pause? It said everything. Sunny then began dismantling the argument point by point. She cited verified touring reports from stadium authorities, not fan accounts. She referenced second-filed revenue disclosures from partnered corporations. She pointed out Nielsen-backed streaming certifications. These are audited metrics, she clarified, not social media impressions. The room went quiet. This wasn't fan defense, it was evidentiary correction, but she went deeper. Sunny addressed the coded language often used around non-Western acts. When we describe American artists' fan coordination, we call it engagement, she explained. When we describe Korean artists' fan coordination, we call it manipulation. That's not neutral language. That observation hit like a gavel, because language framing shapes perception. And Sunny knows that better than most. She contextualized BTS's military service within constitutional obligation, emphasizing that fulfilling national duty should not be reframed as professional instability. "We respect service here," she said firmly. "We don't weaponize it." That line trended instantly. But what made her defense even stronger was her structural lens on bias. She acknowledged how Western entertainment historically centers itself as the benchmark for real success. "If impact originates elsewhere first, we question it," she said. That's a pattern. She referenced past skepticism toward Latin global waves, Afrobeat expansions, and even early hip-hop crossover eras. Then she delivered a line that cut clean. Cultural dominance isn't owned, it evolves. The audience applauded not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. Sunny also broke down the manufactured group stereotype with legal-like clarity. She listed songwriting credits across multiple BTS albums and solo projects. She cited production roles held by SUGA and RM. She noted documented rehearsal hours and live performance consistency. "That's labor," she said. And labor deserves acknowledgement. That word labor shifted the frame from glamour to work ethic. She humanized them without romanticizing them. She recognized Jin's return from military service as a stabilizing symbolic moment. She described Jungkook's global pop integration as strategic adaptation. She praised Jimin's emotional storytelling as artistic vulnerability. She acknowledged V's brand crossover as market intelligence. She highlighted J-Hope's performance discipline and RM's diplomatic articulation. It wasn't fandom energy, it was comprehensive analysis. Online reactions exploded not just from ARMY, but from legal commentators praising her structured rebuttal. Media analysts later noted how rare it is for daytime television to host a fact-based dismantling of entertainment bias with this level of clarity. Sunny didn't shout, she didn't dramatize. She simply refused to let weak arguments pass unchallenged. And when critics online attempted to reduce her defense to celebrity favoritism, she responded in a follow-up interview. Supporting documented facts isn't favoritism. It's accuracy. Calm, controlled, unshaken, that's what made number 4 different. It felt like a courtroom moment where assumption met evidence and didn't survive. So, ask yourself this. When a former prosecutor methodically deconstructs media skepticism about 7 global artists using verified data and linguistic analysis, does that permanently shift the tone of the conversation? And if number 4 just turned daytime TV into a fact-checking arena, what kind of force are the top 3 about to unleash? Number 3. The mainstream megaphone, Jimmy Fallon. If there's one American TV host who has lived through BTS mania up close, felt the tremor of screaming studio floors, watched hashtags explode in real time, seen security teams scramble because the crowd outside stretched 3 blocks, it's Jimmy Fallon. So, when in 2026 the comeback conversation started leaning into that subtle, almost passive-aggressive tone, well, let's see if they can still pull the same numbers. Fallon didn't just respond, he amplified. And when Fallon amplifies, the mainstream listens. On The Tonight Show, during a segment about major reunion tours, Jimmy grinned at the camera and said, "I love how every few years people ask if BTS is still big. Like, were you asleep?" The audience laughed, but Fallon quickly pivoted to receipts. He rolled behind-the-scenes footage from their previous Tonight Show takeover Grand Central Terminal performances, outdoor concert specials, cross-country episodes filmed in Seoul. "We don't shut down landmarks for artists who are maybe relevant," he said playfully. That line hit because it was true. Fallon has always treated BTS like headline royalty, not niche guests, but in 2026, his defense went beyond nostalgia. He pulled up reunion tour data, fastest stadium sellouts in multiple US cities, streaming rebounds that outpaced pre-hiatus projections, merch demand that crashed online servers. "If this is a comeback," Fallon joked, "it's the kind most artists dream about." But the real shift came when a guest music blogger lightly suggested that BTS power was mostly fan-driven momentum. Fallon didn't dismiss the money fandom, he reframed it. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "And fans are the music industry." That mic drop energy changed the tone. He explained how ARMY's organization isn't artificial inflation, it's community mobilization. He compared it to sports franchises, Marvel fandoms, even political campaigns. "When passion organizes, that's culture," he said. And then he did something subtle but powerful. He highlighted individual growth. He talked about RM's thoughtful interviews that left staff impressed long after tapings ended. He mentioned SUGA's production collaborations that blurred genre boundaries. He praised J-Hope's performance stamina, recalling rehearsal sessions that ran longer than scheduled because of precision. He described Jimin's emotional presence on stage, V's unpredictable artistic choices that kept visuals fresh, Jungkook's global pop adaptability, and Jin's return moment that reignited chemistry instantly. Fallon wasn't reading a script, he was recalling experiences. That authenticity made the defense land differently. He even addressed the military service chapter head-on. "They didn't disappear," he said. "They leveled up individually." That reframing mattered. Instead of treating the hiatus as lost time, he framed it as strategic evolution. Social media lit up again not just because he defended them, but because he normalized them. Fallon didn't position BTS as outsiders breaking in. He positioned them as established fixtures of American late-night history. He reminded viewers that they had consistently brought record-breaking engagement to his platform for years. "Our highest digital spikes?" he said casually. You can guess who. The audience cheered before he even finished. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Fallon looked directly into the camera and said, without a joke, "Music doesn't need permission to be global anymore." That line spread fast. Analysts noted how Fallon's tone wasn't confrontational, it was celebratory. He wasn't fighting critics, he was laughing at outdated thinking, and that laughter carried influence. Because Fallon's brand is joy. When someone known for lighthearted entertainment takes a firm stand, it signals confidence. He didn't shout down skeptics, he drowned them out with visibility. He gave BTS prime placement, extended segments, interactive games, and live performance slots that reminded mainstream audiences exactly why they command attention. That's what makes number 3 powerful. Fallon didn't just defend BTS with words, he defended them with platform power, exposure, space, visibility. And in television, visibility equals validation. So here's the question. When the host who helped introduce BTS to millions of American households doubles down in 2026 and says, "They're not guests, they're global mainstays," doesn't that solidify their place in pop culture memory? And if number 3 just used the biggest late-night megaphone to amplify their legacy, what kind of shockwave are the top 2 about to deliver?
Number 2. The brutal honesty broadcast, Bill Maher. Now this was unexpected. Because when you think of Bill Maher, you don't immediately think BTS defender. You think sharp tongue, political heat, controversial takes, zero-filter commentary. Which is exactly why what happened in 2026 hit like a shockwave. When criticism resurfaced framing BTS's reunion as overhyped global branding, Maher didn't soften it. He didn't sugarcoat it. He bulldozed the lazy narrative in his own brutally analytical way. On Real Time with Bill Maher, during a panel discussing globalization and cultural power shifts, a guest casually dismissed BTS as corporate-engineered pop dominance. The audience gave a polite chuckle. Maher didn't. He leaned forward and said, "Corporate-engineered? You mean like every major American pop act funded by billion-dollar labels?" The crowd froze for half a second, then erupted. But Bill wasn't done. "Let's not pretend capitalism suddenly became immoral because it speaks Korean," he added. That line detonated across social media within minutes. What made this moment powerful wasn't praise, it was consistency. Maher has built a career criticizing corporate influence. So, when he pointed out that Western pop infrastructure operates under the exact same mechanics critics accuse BTS of using, it exposed hypocrisy. He pulled up revenue structures, label partnerships, global touring economics. "You don't get mad at the system when it benefits you," he said. "You get mad when it's not centered on you." And there it was, the core. Bill reframed the discomfort not as musical skepticism, but as cultural ego. Then he pivoted into data. 2026 reunion tour numbers. Verified stadium capacities. Global streaming rebounds that outperformed US only acts, "That's not illusion," he stated flatly. That's market reality. The blunt delivery hit harder than emotional defense ever could. Maher also addressed the military service narrative. "They paused to serve their country," he said. "That's not a publicity stunt. That's the law." He compared it to American athletes serving in the military historically and being praised for discipline. "Consistency matters," he added. He wasn't romanticizing them. He was applying equal standards. Then came something rare for Bill: measured acknowledgement of artistry. He cited RM's intellectual interviews that surprised Western journalists, SUGA's production credentials across hip-hop landscapes, J-Hope's festival-scale stamina, Jimin's emotionally driven solo resonance, V's artistic unpredictability, Jungkook's global pop calibration, and Jin's return moment symbolizing cohesion. "You don't hold attention this long without substance," he said. And from Maher, that's not flattery, that's validation. The segment grew sharper when he addressed the teenage girl fandom stereotype. "Men have built entire sports empires on obsessive fandom," he pointed out. "But when young women organize, suddenly it's hysteria?" That mic drop moment reframed not just BTS discourse, but gender bias in pop culture. Analysts later called it one of the most unexpectedly balanced takes of Maher's season. Not because he was sentimental, but because he was consistent. He didn't defend BTS emotionally, he defended logical fairness. If capitalism, fandom, touring, infrastructure, and branding are accepted for American acts, they must be accepted for Korean acts too. No double standards, no selective outrage. And when online critics accused him of going soft, Maher responded the following week with a smirk. "Consistency isn't softness, it's integrity." That line stuck. Because love him or hate him, Bill Maher values intellectual consistency. And in 2026, intellectual consistency favored BTS. That's what made number 2 so explosive. A host known for dismantling political spin turned that same energy toward dismantling shallow pop criticism. No glitter, no fanfare, just blunt force logic. So, let me ask you this. When even one of America's most unapologetically critical commentators says, "The numbers don't lie," doesn't that shift the argument from taste to fact? And if number 2 already shook the table with brutal honesty, what kind of seismic moment is waiting at number 1? Number 1, the cultural earthquake monologue, John Oliver. And here we are. The moment that didn't just trend. It didn't just go viral. It didn't just spark debate. It detonated the entire narrative. Because when John Oliver decided to dedicate a full deep dive segment in 2026 to the question, why are people still questioning BTS, he didn't defend them casually. He built a 2-minute case, with charts, with media clips, with receipts, with satire so sharp it felt surgical. It started deceptively light. On Last Week Tonight, Oliver opened with a montage of Western headlines subtly implying BTS's peak may have passed. He paused the footage and said, deadpan, "Ah yes." The classic American tradition of declaring something over the moment it doesn't revolve around us. The audience laughed, but that laugh quickly turned into attention. Because Oliver didn't stay in joke mode, he went investigative. He broke down reunion tour numbers city by city, verified stadium capacities, secondary market resale data, economic impact reports from U.S. municipalities. This, he said while pointing at the screen, is what decline apparently looks like. The sarcasm was dry, controlled, devastating. Then he zoomed out. Let's examine why this narrative even exists. And that's when the segment turned historic. Oliver dissected Western media patterns of minimizing non-English dominance. He referenced Latin pop waves being labeled temporary. He referenced Afrobeats being called niche before charting globally. He referenced early hip-hop being dismissed as youth noise. Notice a theme? He asked. The audience murmured. And then came the thesis. When influence originates outside traditional Western pipelines, skepticism becomes reflex. That line didn't feel like pop commentary. It felt academic. Oliver then dismantled the manufactured group stereotype in forensic detail. He displayed songwriting credits across multiple BTS albums. He highlighted SUGA's production portfolio, RM's lyrical authorship, J-Hope's choreographic contribution, Jimin's vocal interpretation depth, V's conceptual involvement, Jungkook's arrangement participation, and Jin's evolving artistic role post-service. If this is factory production, Oliver quipped, it's the most overachieving factory in modern music history. But he didn't stop at artistry. He tackled the military service narrative head-on. He explained South Korea's conscription law. He compared it to civic duty frameworks globally. They fulfilled a legal obligation, he said firmly. Not a PR hiatus. That clarity mattered. Then came the moment that changed everything. Oliver addressed the fandom narrative. When millions of people organize around something meaningful to them, he said, we call it democracy in politics, loyalty in sports, and hysteria in pop music. If the audience is primarily young women, the room went silent before erupting. Because he had just exposed gender bias and cultural bias in one sentence. He didn't glorify BTS, he contextualized them. He framed their 2026 comeback not as a desperate attempt to reclaim spotlight, but as the continuation of a decade-long structural presence. He showed global streaming comparisons against major Western acts. He pointed out that BTS's reunion numbers didn't just match expectations, they exceeded pre-hiatus benchmarks. Statistically, Oliver concluded, the only thing fading is the accuracy of the criticism. Social media didn't just react, it exploded. Media professors dissected the segment in classrooms. Think Pieces called it one of the most comprehensive pop culture breakdowns in late-night history. Even skeptics admitted the argument was airtight. But the most powerful moment wasn't a joke, it was quiet. Oliver looked into the camera and said calmly, you don't have to personally enjoy BTS to acknowledge their impact, but denying that impact requires ignoring evidence. No sarcasm, no punchline. Just truth. That's what made number one different. It wasn't emotional defense. It wasn't celebrity camaraderie. It wasn't platform amplification. It was systemic dismantling of bias, delivered with humor sharp enough to entertain and logic strong enough to withstand scrutiny. And here's the final question for you. If after a decade of global dominance, military service, solo evolution, and a record-breaking reunion, people are still debating whether BTS is relevant, is that a reflection of the group or of the framework used to measure them? Because in 2026, when John Oliver dropped that monologue, one thing became clear. BTS didn't need defending. The narrative did. So, after hearing all 13 names, after watching how late-night giants, political commentators, investigative journalists, daytime icons, and cultural analysts stepped up and said, hold on, let's get the facts straight. What do you think? Was 2026 the year BTS proved they were beyond debate? Or was it the year Western media finally caught up to a reality the world already knew? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which defense hit you the hardest and which moment gave you chills. Did John Oliver's breakdown seal it for you? Was Bill Maher's blunt logic the turning point? Or did Fallon's megaphone energy feel the most powerful? Let's talk about it. And if you love deep dive narratives like this, where pop culture meets facts, emotion meets analysis, and every list feels like a documentary ride, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next countdown. Because trust me, the next topic is even wilder. See you in the next breakdown.